All right, let's get talking about how you can use auto filter on your harmony so that you're sort of bubble wrapping your percussion elements, almost creating a bit of harmonic percussion in its own right. It's going to make more sense as I dive into it, so let's jump in. So what I've done is set up the session. So we have drums, our MPE keys bending like they had before, and an octave higher version of the same keyboard part. The original keyboard part sounded like this. Up an octave sounds like this. And our drums sound like this. What I'm going to do is delegate the kick drum so that it affects the lower keyboard part and the snare so that it affects the upper keyboard part. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go over to audio effects and I'm going to pull in the auto filter, which is right up near the top. Auto filter will bring it onto both keyboard parts. I'm actually going to mute this top keyboard part for now, and I'm going to bring down the filter so we're just hearing a muffled version of this part. So let's say around 230. You can bring up the resonance a little bit. It's going to kind of give a bit more of a whippy sound. I'll show you what I'm talking about once I've set this up. But the important thing here is that you click this little triangle to open up the external side chaining. So we have external, and our source is going to be from our drums. It is going to be specifically our kick. So every time the kick happens, something is going to happen with this auto filter. And that something is determined by this envelope knob over here. Do I want the filter to pull down every time the kick happens? And how much do I want it to pull down? Or do I want it to pull up? In this case, pulling down is going to go from muffled to a non-existent sound. Pulling up is going to open up those upper frequencies. So it sounds like this. Listen with the resonance up. You'll see what I mean with that whippy sound. We can take that same filter. I'm going to hold Control and duplicate it over to the upper keyboard part. And I'm just going to change the input to the snare drum. So now it's... Maybe bring the frequency down a bit more. You don't have to open up the envelope all the way either. You could have it just partial. So with the drums, you'll see that these harmonic elements are sort of highlighting the kick and highlighting the snare so that they have harmonic qualities. They're representing chords, but we're not hearing chords all the time. It sounds like this. Now, if you've ever heard my music as Seizure's Palace, you will recognize that this is a sound I use very frequently. We're bending between chords and we're using this auto filter sort of like a gate where anytime the drums happen, we're hearing this sound. But it's gradual over time and it's also working through a frequency spectrum. And speaking of gradual over time, if you click around this envelope button, you'll see that there's attack and release. If I really open up that attack, wow, instead of bow, it's wow. It kind of slowly opens up. We can do the same thing for this bass drum part here. Bow, 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 wow, wow, wow. Little Owen Wilson for you, so check it out. So it sounds better with a little bit of an attack, not like perfectly zero. I'm sort of playing around with that a little bit. Another thing you can do is you can flip the type of filter you're working with and start with it really high and have the envelope pull it lower. So now we have together. It just creates all this liquidy goodness. I always say it's kind of like bubble wrapping things a little bit. It feels like the kick and snare are sort of wrapped with this woof around it, this little bubble wrap. That's just how I think about it. You can think about it however you want, but the idea is we're pulling in an auto filter. It is being triggered to some sort of a source, generally a kick drum or snare drum. You can do this to anything though. You could have a synth being controlled by a vocal part. You can really get playing around. In terms of control and hierarchy of instruments, we have sidechain compression, which we haven't talked about in this course, but it's one way for an instrument to tell another instrument to get quieter. But this is kind of like the opposite, where it's like I have only high frequencies, and then when another instrument plays, this is joining in with some of those lower frequencies. So it's just a way to be able to tuck everything together and sort of smooth things out. But again, it sounds kind of liquid in the way that things move, especially as you play around with this resonance. Watch what happens when I really pull this up. It's pretty substantial. So while this isn't me teaching you major and minor chords, it's a production course after all. Something you can do that's really fun with harmony is this. You can do it with melody, but it doesn't work as well, I promise you. It has to do with the range of the melody being quite often higher, and these really fun sounds that I like to play around with do need a bit of low content. Also, melodies move around a lot, so our filter might not always be affecting the melody the same way. So if the melody moves up really high, but I'm trying to pull down and sweep into low frequencies, that's not really going to change anything. But with chords, if you voice lead them properly and invert them properly, what you'll end up having is a pretty narrow range. So this auto filter is always working within that same relatively narrow frequency spectrum. Another thing that's fun on these newer auto filters is the drive. You can really pull that sound up so it's very present. And again, we can pull this down pretty low. Check this out. I love these sort of sounds. Back with the drums. Let's add in our other synth. I'm going to pull it back. I prefer the low pass version. I'm going to pull it quite low, maybe some pretty high resonance. Oh, we're still flipped for our envelope. Let's bring that back up. Now these sound pretty similar, and at this point I could just have the kick and snare, the full drum part, affecting one of these synths, and it would sound about the same. What I like about splitting this low and high version is that I can pull this up a bit, and now we have two different elements working with one another. Lastly, let's get a little bit crazy. Let's bring in a hi-hat part and get a third keyboard part to be responding to the hi-hat. It's going to be a little bit of a quicker flick in terms of that tut that's happening. But if I go over to my splice sounds, pull in a hi-hat, I don't really care which one it is for now. We're not focused too much on perfecting the drums, just having something that is functional. Okay, we have a basic part. Let's bring the keys in. This is the higher keyboard part. Another thing I could consider is, just for some differences here, I could take the notes and do a bit of that inversion trick, just so that there's a bit of a textural difference to these chords here, and they're working with different inversions. Again, the auto filter in this case is drums, but now it's set to the hi-hat. If we listen to it by itself, we can hear a bit more of that steady pulse. Maybe we want to try the high pass version. What's cool about the high pass version is now we're hearing the high end of the chord that's happening up around here consistently. So it is filling out the frequency spectrum a little bit more. All together we have it's already starting to feel like it's like a functional song. There isn't really a melody happening, but we have drums and all this stuff that's really hard to explain happening around the drums until you've kind of gone through step by step and used this approach. So auto filter and the way that it can work with harmony, I think is a seriously untapped resource. We got to stop every 10 years thinking that pitching up vocals to chipmunk vocals and pitching them down to demonic sounding vocals is some new technique. Let's start using new techniques. Let's use MPE, let's use autofilter, and let's create something like what happened with dubstep, where we were just using LFOs all over the place. And it was this new sound and people went crazy. I'm not saying dubstep is the best genre ever. I'm just saying at the time, it was quite unique. Whereas now I think these auto filters, which I'm reluctant to even share this information because it's such a big part of my sound, I think these are up and coming. So get used to how these can work to benefit your sound. So that's it for this class on applying auto filter to your chords. In our next class, we're going to talk about arpeggiating notes. I'll see you there.